Thank you, Toby, for your time. By the way, I'm a huge fan of Johnny Flynn, so
Oh, amazing.
he's
Wonderful.
he's great. Johnny Flynn, I
Yeah.
think Johnny Flynn deserves the award because it's really, really great. So
Oh, I'm pleased you're a fan. He's an amazing artist. And yeah, I'm very pleased to be part of his team. We've been working together for almost 20 years now. So yeah, that's awesome.
wow, that's great. So talking about the documentary, did you remember the very first time that you heard the band Blur, the word of the band Blur?
Yeah, I think it would have been like it would have been the very early to yeah, pre-mid 90s. So when I was 9 years old, um I first heard Girls and Boys and To the End, those two singles from Park Life in 1994. And then I think when I started digging into Blur more, I realized that I had heard There's No Other Way from 1991. I was like, oh, it's that band that did that song a few years earlier. But the stylistic and musical leap they had between 1991 and 1994 in those 3 years was huge. You know, they went from being a band that's sort of had a bit of a kind of, Stone Roses sort of Happy Mondays influence all the way to then becoming their own unique version of a guitar pop band. I mean, Girls and Boys and To the End, to have those two singles come out at the beginning of an album campaign was so unusual because you had one big sort of cheeky, upbeat disco pop song that was quite naughty and quite edgy. And then you had this very beautiful, elegant ballad, that sounded like a classic sort of French, I don't know, sort of symphonic pop song. So I was just captivated and confused by this band. And that allowed me to buy Park Life on cassette at the age of 9. And that was when I was like, oh, I'm obsessed. So that was how it all began.
And the very first time that you met Damon and Graham and the other, what was?
So I first met uh what was the order? In 2009, our record label had the opportunity to put out an album by Graham Coxon, called The Spinning Top, which is an amazing record. And by coincidence, that was the same year that Blur got back together for the first time. And so we were putting out this record by Graham the same year that they were playing all these first big shows in 2009. And so I got to know Graham through that, and it was a real pleasure putting out that very beautiful record, which was largely folk influenced. And then a couple of years later, we were via mutual friends introduced to Damon to talk about his Africa Express project, where he brings different artists from around different countries in Africa with other artists from around the world, and they make music and put on these big festivals and concerts. And we wanted to put out a non-profit series of records back then, and we did about 3 albums with Africa Express, which to this day were some of my favorite records we've ever put out on our label, Transgressive, and led to us signing artists like Songhai Blues from Mali and uh, Moonchild Sonelli from South Africa. Lots of really interesting artists. So we got to know Damon through that. And then a few years then went by and we weren't really sort of speaking to Damon or Graham. And then the next interaction was COVID actually. Like everyone was doing different things. And then Damon's team got in touch and said he had made an album during lockdown, and it was his second solo album, The Nearer the Fountain, More Pure the Stream Flows, which is a really a beautiful, beautiful album. And we had the opportunity to release that on our label, and that's how we then reconnected with Damon, and yeah, like so through those relationships, I knew Damon and Graham collaboratively. And, again, going back to what we said earlier about me being a kid and now working with them and putting music out with them, it was just a dream. And, there were such interesting records as well. So anyway, time went by, and then I heard a rumor that Blur were going to get back together again to do their biggest ever gigs at Wembley Stadium. And alongside running a label, I've always been making films and documentaries since I was about 18 years old. So I just said to Damon informally, I was like, hey, if you want anyone to, hold a camera at Wembley, let me know. And then about 6 months later, I got the call saying, "Hey, do you want to make the documentary and the concert film?" And then that's how it all happened. Um, I had to sit down with not just Damon and Graham, but obviously with Alex and Dave, because the four of them are a true band and democracy. And I had to convince Alex and Dave that it was a good idea for me to be involved, which was a bit stressful, but we got there, and the direction and the approach I told them for the film that I'd love to make, which they signed off on, was trying to do something quite personal, raw, honest, nothing too flashy. It couldn't be too controlled or contrived. It needed to feel very real. And thankfully, they all agreed to that. And then that's how it all started.
Yeah. How was the most difficult part in putting together the pieces of the puzzle?
What the film itself?
Yeah.
Um, it's just the volume of footage. We were filming for 6 months on and off, and you have literally hundreds of hours of material. And so the only way, this is why I would, to anyone making a documentary, my advice would always be make sure you know what you want to make from the beginning. So be open to what it could be, but have a clear idea, because the problem is if you go into it and you don't have that structure in your mind, you could get lost in the footage and you could just be like, oh, maybe that's the story. Maybe that's more interesting. And you lose your way. But thankfully, from the beginning and before we started filming, and what I said to the band in the first meeting was that we wanted it to be about relationships, friendship, getting older, mortality, so life and death, everything in between. It had to be more emotional and elevated beyond band gets together and, plays a huge stadium. Like that's quite interesting, but not really. It's we've seen that film before. So for me, it was more about how do we make something that's a bit more human and a bit more emotional, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you find an explanation of the huge success of the Blur? The secret, I mean, the secret
Um,
behind its success.
the secret behind the success. I mean, for me, it's like the themes of the songs and the quality of the songwriting and the melodies themselves. I think they transcend time. They were popular in the 90s. However, 20, 30 years on, there's still like a resonance and a connectivity about the subject matter and the times that we're in. The album that they put out in 1993, Modern Life is Rubbish, that could have come out today, depressingly. And I think that there's always been that slightly dystopian, forward-thinking view in Damon's lyrics that connect an eternal feeling of the way the world feels. And I think that's why they still connect with people. And then also, some of the songs are just hyper emotional, brilliant, and just like really connective songs. Like a song like Tender is a really brutal and beautiful ballad love song that it could have been released in the 60s. It could have been released as it was in 1999. It could have been released 9 days ago. That a song like that is timeless in its feel and in its meaning. So I think that they maybe without planning it, but just by the sheer luck of talent, managed to embody a lot of feelings and ideas that will always have a sense of eternity, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And you work with Liam Gallagher too, some years
Yes,
ago.
yes, that was really
How
fun.
much different are the two universe?
Ooh, how
Like
different.
London and Manchester?
Yeah. I mean, it's really funny. It's like, yeah, of course, every single person on this planet is different. But you know what? Every single person on this planet has a lot in common as well. Like we all do the same things. We all sort of like, act the same way. We have the same feelings and emotions. I mean, I don't know. The thing I just found brilliant about Liam is just, and one thing they had in common was that Blur individually are very funny and Liam is very funny. So they say quite outrageous shit a lot of the time. I think in the 90s, maybe artists were pushed more by journalists to say outrageous shit. Now I think people are very, probably quite rightly, quite controlled because these things mean that if you say anything, it goes absolutely everywhere and drives people wild. Whereas in the 90s, there was a bit more cheekiness and it was a bit more naughty, and people knew you could have a bit more fun. So I think musicians are a bit less self-conscious about, I don't know, taking the piss out of themselves or other people. But yeah, that seems to have changed. But certainly then, I think artists like Liam and Damon and everyone, they were all encouraged to be a bit more animated about being a rock star, if you will. But yeah, working with Liam was great. It was a real privilege to do that.
And what's your favorite musical documentary ever? Do you have one?
Um, I mean, it changes because there are so many I love. I mean, I really love Dig, the Anton Newcomb and Dandy Warhol's documentary. I think that's amazing. It was made over a long period of time, so it's got an amazing depth to it, and it's funny and it's stressful and it's really interesting. So I think that's a great movie. I love the Metallica Some Kind of Monster documentary as well. Again, very much about relationships. I was very surprised by how real and honest that one was as well. Um, what else? The boy band Bros after the screaming stops is really funny. And also heartbreaking in equal measure. That's a really interesting one. I just like it. Truthfully, the thing that unites all of those, I just like things that are real because I think there's a lot of bullshit documentaries. Like you watch them and they're not documentaries. They're just like, you know, they're just PR. You just know,
Yeah, fake.
and it's a challenge to not do that yourself because there's a lot of you want to keep everyone on side and you want to keep the good energy, etc. But in order for it to stand out or to be respected, it's got to have like the light and the shade. It can't just all be everything's great, everything's fantastic. Like that's not what life is like. Life has ups and downs, and so I think any documentary needs to showcase that truthfully as well.
Absolutely. What is music for you? Could you live without music?
I'm not sure I could, is the truth. I think music for me is like other than food, it's like, and water, it's like the nourishment that makes life, rich. You could have no money in your bank account and hear a song and emotionally be rich through music. And you could be, like literally in an industrial state in the middle of nowhere, like with no prospects, no hope, and then you hear a song and it can make you feel full. Equally, you can be in a beautiful place, like, in the middle of paradise in the countryside, or like, or a beautiful beach with a sunset, and then the perfect song comes on and it just makes your heart explode. You could be breaking up with someone and there's always a song there to help you through that period. Music is medicine. It's not really like anything else. So it's also the one art form I think that is the consistency through every element of life. Whether you're walking in a shopping center, watching a film, going to a sports match, eating in a restaurant, whatever you're doing, there's always music. And music is the thing that kind of brings people together and is celebratory and is cathartic. So for me, I don't think I could live without it. And the level of importance I place upon it is everything. It's my passion, it's my hobby, it's my salvation, it's my it's the thing I have arguments about. It's the thing I study. It's the thing I collect. It's the thing I do. It's the most important thing in my life other than my family, I think.
Absolutely. My last question is about the music business. Many things are changed from the 90s now, and we have now Spotify, Tidal. Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Always optimistic, definitely. If you're not optimistic, you can't create alternatives. You have to start with optimism. Because if you're negative or despondent, you can't change anything. You'll submit, you'll surrender to the inevitability of the things you don't like. If you're optimistic, you believe something better can happen. So, so I choose to be an optimist, and I've studied and practiced being an optimist for most of my life. And you know, ultimately, if you look at the positives of what music streaming have done, they have created an openness and accessibility for music internationally for people that either couldn't access it or couldn't afford it. So now it's everywhere. The downside, as always, with the music industry, and this has always existed, is the gap in the value chain, the people that make money and the people that don't make money. But I would argue, is that not just the world we're in? Whether it's politics or corporations, we're just in an era in 2025, sadly, and hopefully we will topple this and overcome it, where the top end of the industry is doing super well, and there is no middle and there is no working class, you know. So what we need to do over the next 5, 10 years, 15 years is we need to address the value balance, and we need to invert it, and we need to spread and distribute the successes of the growth of online music to the creators. So hopefully in time that balance will occur, but there's a lot of work to be done.
So thank you very much, Toby. So, but now I want a documentary about Johnny Flynn. You have
Ah, yes. Well, we're looking into it. We're looking into it. I'll
ah,
keep you posted.
could be interesting.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Andrea. Lovely to
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
talk.
Andrea.